This is a reprise edition of an episode that previously ran. You can find all of the episodes on most of the common podcast apps, or you can go to eriemusichistory.buzzsprout.com. So it's all one word, Erie Music History, and then dot, and then Buzzsprout, BUZZSPROUT.com. Thanks to the JPT Foundation for their continual financial support of this podcast, and thanks to you for listening. Please rate and review the podcast on whatever app you use. It does help. Now here's the episode. Hey, welcome to the Erie Music History Podcast. I'm Chip Shell, your host, and today I have my first live interview with Paula Holmes. Paula, welcome.
Thank you. Nice to be here. Honor.
And your maiden name back then was?
Grack, G-R-A-C-K, and that's how a lot of people might remember me.
That's what I wondered if I should mention that. Yeah, Paula Grack.
Yeah.
And really, we're talking about, did you go to Vincent or where'd you go?
Yes, I went to Roosevelt and Vincent.
All
I was
right.
one of those kids, yep.
Were you in music back then or?
Do you really want to know the answer?
I want to know how it all started.
Okay. Well, when I was about 12, my dad was a singer. My dad was a big band singer, and he would go from one club in Erie to another. This is after the war. With
What
his
clubs?
music. Oh, Calabrese Club when it was there. GCS. I don't even remember them all, but he used to let me come with him.
Oh.
And he just sang. That's all he did. And sometimes he would take his music under his arm, like you see people do in like New Orleans with they have their trombone under their arm and they're going to that club and this club and that club. And that's what he did. He just sang in floor shows mainly.
Wow. And so you got to see him do that.
Oh,
and you
yeah.
got the bug?
I used to sit on the side and watch Dad. And he did a lot of weddings, for pin money.
Sure.
He was a teacher. And he would bring me with him to the churches. I mean, there were Protestant, Catholic, it didn't matter. And he would sing his songs during the service. And he taught me a couple. I was about 7. And so I would do like an Ave Maria or something. Didn't know what I was doing. And pretty soon they were asking for the little girl.
Oh.
Can you bring the little girl? And by the time I was 13, one of my buddies, I don't know if you know Carl Olson and Paul Olson.
I don't, but you mentioned all their names because I think a lot of people
listen. A lot of people will know Carl. We went to school together. Mike DeMarco was another one. Jimmy Hetz, whose son plays, I know he plays guitar.
Okay.
Anyway, we were sitting in Jimmy Hetz's basement, us 13, and they said, hey, we're starting a band. Can you sing like this? And they played me, I don't know, some Janis Joplin or something. And I sat there and I said, I don't know. I've never sung like that before. But I'd grown up in my bedroom singing along to the Shirelles and, all the girl groups. And before you know it, we had a band. And
so this
is something.
What year is this, do you think? You're 13?
Let's see. Oh, I got to do the math. 66, something like that.
All right.
I was 13, 14. And I remember after doing that we played at a place called Junior Wyco. And you're too young to know about all these gyms, right?
I've heard of it.
Okay.
Yeah.
There was Junior Wyco for the tough kids who were in senior high school downtown at the Y. Yep. And ours was at the Glenwood Y. Okay. And it was our first gig. They would play records and everybody would slow dance in one room, but we were their first live band, I think.
What was the name?
I remember what we were called, the Titans.
Nice. I like that.
Yeah. Not feminine at all.
No.
And I remember doing songs like Hey Joe and Light My Fire and just whatever was there, we did it. And getting my first, I think I made $5 or $10.
And you're 14 years old.
I was so happy. Yeah. I went home and I said to Dad, I said, I know why you do this now, because you're having fun and making money at the same time. So that's how that started. Long story. Sorry to make it too lengthy.
No, that's what we want. Yeah, that's what we want. So the Titans, what happened to the Titans? Did they break up then? And then?
Yeah, and everybody went into different bands, including me. Went to Vincent. There were a lot of great musicians there, including Scott.
Right.
Now, I never played with him in high school, but I played with Tom Arndt. Bobby Berger. I don't know if you know who Bob Berger. Okay.
Yep.
Bob and I were in one of the versions of Kelly Seller. And
Right.
this is when I was a singer. I don't know if you've ever heard of that vintage band.
Yeah,
They
I
were
have.
really good. I mean, they had me singing stuff that was so varied, and it was just so enriching to me as a vocalist with no training to have to hit notes like Ian Gillan and Deep Purple, and then switch to Julie Driscoll and Brian Auger and the Trinity, which was jazz.
So were you
it was
playing?
and John Drum was in the band too. I got to mention John.
And these
John
were
Drum.
all cover bands, though.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Okay.
Everything. I mean,
Right.
I don't write. My son's band is another story. He doesn't not do originals.
Okay.
He doesn't do covers unless he wants to make some money doing voiceovers.
I didn't know if
Otherwise, it's all him.
Yeah, I didn't know if back then, like some of the guys were saying, "Hey, let's write our own originals." But you're playing Wyco. Where are you playing with Kelly Seller?
With
right?
Kelly Seller, you name it. We were playing at homecomings, different schools, outdoor stuff, things like that.
Because you're still young, you can't play in bars probably at that point, right?
Okay. Well, I kind of did when I was 18 when I started at the Calabrese Club. And I remember whenever, don't tell anybody, but whenever not the cops so much, but the union guys would come in, I'd have to grab a tambourine or something and play it so that I would technically be a musician. Rather than an underage girl singing on a stage. So, yeah.
So you didn't have to join the musicians union?
I'm a vocalist, and that's it. So
and that was it.
Technically, no, it was my age that I think made the difference. I'm kind of hazy on that one, but I'm pretty sure. The one thing I do remember about that band is the Calabrese Club was a big deal with our parents' generation.
Okay.
People would get dressed up and they would go to Little Italy at the time, and the Calabrese Club was the place to be.
Right.
And then it kind of was dying a death, I guess, for many years. And they decided to revamp it and resurrect it. And the way to do that was to have a great house band. So I don't know if I rattle off these names. Paul Yocklin.
Yep. Oh yeah, sure.
Away, sadly,
absolutely.
recently.
Right. Yep.
He was the head of the band. He'd come back from his gigs, in New York City and all over the place as one of the younger brothers.
Right. Right.
He kind of started it. And Nick Nardo.
Yeah. Were these guys all older than you, or?
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
I mean, Nick was only a year older than me. Angelo Natali. I don't know if you know who Ange is.
Yeah, Ange and Pete, right?
Yeah, and Peter was in the band. And Ardiola, Jerry, Mike Goodwin, Angelo, and Dickie Buckle.
Right.
Dick Buckle. Yeah. So we all kind of converged in this band. Nick dragged me along because he knew I could sing, and we'd kind of dated a little bit, and we were friends. And he said, by the hand, literally said, "I'm taking you to rehearsal. They need a girl singer, and I want them to hear you." And they almost got someone else. This is the legend. I won't name names. They almost got another girl. Because girl singers back then, I mean, now you see all these women and girls singing, right? But back then, you just didn't see that.
So you were a lead singer. You're not talking being a backup singer. You were a lead singer. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, I mean, like Paul and Dickie and those guys, I mean, they all sing too, right? I mean, Paul obviously does.
I would see, we used to take it in turns. I think I probably did the majority of the singing.
Okay.
And I'd do a duet with Paul. And sometimes he would do leads when he'd do one of his, I used to tease him, Engelbert Humperdinck type songs. I would always do harmonies. Angelo has a gorgeous voice.
Right.
He would sing too.
And
so we just did different. I think I did the bulk of the singing, really.
So when you got dragged to practice, what year is this, do you think?
1971, a month after I graduated from Strong Vincent High School.
Oh, okay. So what was your plan right after high school? What were you going to do?
Oh, I didn't have, my father told me what my plan was. I wanted to go to some hippy dippy school and be an artsy person out in Antioch in Ohio or somewhere like that.
Right.
And Dad was an educator, and he said no, because I had a 4-year scholarship to Gannon College with books, tuition, everything paid for. Yeah. All I had to do was keep my nose clean and show up and get a certain average. So, that's what I did. So I stayed in town. But here's a cute story. You can cut any of this out if you want, Chip.
I'm keeping it all. I love it. I love it.
Paul, of course, Paul Yoklin, through his travels and everything, knew a lot of pretty famous people in the music business. And I guess, I don't think Eddie Brigatti was there, but the Rascals, formerly the Young Rascals, with Felix Cavalieri and I think Dino Danelli played. No, there was another drummer. Some of the original guys, some not. But Felix, the founder, was there. They were playing at Edinburgh for a gig. And after that gig, they were coming down to hear us. I guess Paul must have said, oh, for old time's sake, just come see my band at the Calabrese Club in Erie. So they show up, they go up on stage and they sit in and they do this amazing set. You know, it was like, you think you can play drums? I mean, I thought, you know, everything was going to break. And Nick Nardo looks at his keyboard and says, Felix Cavalieri touched these keys. I'm never playing it again. You know how you are. And I didn't know. I remember that I think Felix Cavalieri was into his yoga thing at the time. He was Hindu, Nehru jacket kind of beads thing. You know, that was an era. He was kind of into, like, I remember the Italian ladies in the kitchen were like, what, no meat? He doesn't want meat? And so during one of the breaks, Felix came up to me and he said, he started writing on a little slip of paper, his name, his phone number, his address, everything. And he said, I want you to come to New York. And I want, every time I think of this, I want to pull my hair out. I want you to come to New York. I'll produce you. I'll take you around people, you know. And I guess later on, I found this years later, I found out that he had said to a couple of the guys in the band, if I could take her with me tonight, I would.
Wow.
I would
That's
take
great.
her. Yeah. So I show it to my dad. I go, Dad, look. And he doesn't know who Felix Cavalieri is. And he doesn't care because I have a scholarship and I'm not leaving town. Are you nuts? And see, because he traveled too in bands, he'd say, I don't want you living out of a suitcase. I don't want that kind of life for my daughter. And I was supposed to go to the Waldorf Astoria. I had my chance to, and I'm so glad I didn't go, you know. So.
Wow.
So I threw it away. I don't know why, or I lost it. And can you imagine nowadays having that opportunity?
Right,
you know?
right. Wow. You're always going to remember that one. That's for sure.
Yeah, it's my swan. It's like my claim to my 15 minutes of almost fame.
There you go. Well, you had lots of fame, you know, with the Ruby Port. I mean, you guys were the house band there at the Calabrese Club. Tell people, because I don't think it's here anymore, right? I mean,
it's been torn down.
Right.
And
where was it?
And it was on 16th and Walnut near St. Paul's Church.
Okay.
It was over there. And it wasn't just a niche place for Italian Americans. It was basically like if you didn't go to the Calabrese Club on a Friday night, there was something wrong with you.
Gotcha.
You know, you just it was the only place to go.
And you
then
guys,
after that, we played till sometimes 3, 4, 5 in the morning.
That's what I was going to say is how often did you play? And then what were the hours that you were playing?
We played, when we first started, it was summertime, and we rehearsed every day, almost 9 to 5 days a week before we got our chops together and started playing for real, which was at the end of the summer. And we were pretty darn good.
Yeah.
We played probably, I think starting out to open up, we played about 4 nights a week.
At the Calabrese Club?
Yes.
Okay.
And then we played on Wednesdays, Fridays, Saturdays, sometimes Sundays. And during holidays, we'd play like on Christmas Eve, or, you know, usually we play, you know, the eve of Thanksgiving or something like that.
But always there.
Yes, we were part of the furniture. We had uniforms.
I saw those uniforms. Yes, I've heard of. I have the pictures here on my iPad for sure. Yeah, and I saw the comment you made about your hot pants. My hot pants matched the guy's trousers.
Exactly.
Red satin and purple corduroy.
Yes, and you know Bobby Seaman, who was our bass player, Bob Seaman.
Yep.
He used to make jokes. He was so funny. The guys back then, the shirts, the collars were like out to your shoulders.
Sure.
And he said, Paul's talking about us flying to Florida. He said, we're not going to need a plane if we wear these things.
Whose idea was it to have the costume or the costumes, the outfits? I mean, that was the thing back then, I know. I mean,
it was the thing. And Paul was still old school about looking like a band.
sure.
You know, back in the day, you have a horn band, you wore uniforms. I was in hippy dippy bands. You know, we just wore whatever we wanted. I looked like, you know, Grace Slick or somebody with my
Like Kelly Seller.
Yeah,
right.
and that's what I was used to. So to have to wear, you know, hot pants, it just wasn't. I was a feminist, you know. You don't do that, but we did. And
I mean, so you had to go out and buy those. I mean, how did you?
I didn't pay for my stuff, thank God, because I threw it in the trash can eventually. You know, my fashion sense was very, very offended by what I had to wear.
Gotcha. And you had to.
Women are funny about this stuff. They really, you know, I think most women care more about that. You know, I don't want you looking at my thighs, you know, kind of thing. Not out of modesty, just because, you know, you're humiliated.
And you were playing 5 days a week sometimes. I mean, you were wearing that outfit a lot.
Yeah, we were. Well, we had a couple changes.
Okay.
We had the purple outfit and the red shiny outfit, you know.
All right. All right. Well, I wish these black and white pictures were in color then. I'm going to need to see some of those.
Were, it's a shame. They were dazzling.
Now there's like 10 people in this band at this point, right?
Yeah. And it fluctuated a lot, Chip. I mean, eventually, I would say we had a very healthy horn section.
Okay.
Especially we had a fellow who was originally from Harbor Creek named Mike Goodwin.
Yeah.
He's about my age, maybe a little older than I am. And he was fabulous. Flute, keyboards, saxophone. He was amazing.
Okay.
We had vibes at one point, you know, and all kinds of stuff. And we also had a second girl singer, Jeannie Kaminsky.
I was going to ask you.
Know anything about Jeannie?
Yeah.
So we became close.
Was she in the band when you joined? I mean, you two?
No.
Okay.
She joined the band a little bit later on, and it was a nice feel because she did more poppy country stuff. Not country, but that lighter stuff. Okay. And I was doing Janis Joplin and Grace Slick and you know, I think we were doing some soul music, and I would do all of that.
So you were
she would do the lighter stuff.
You were doing rock and roll, soul, maybe everything. A little country, everything. That's what I was going to ask. What type of music? It was everything.
We were a human jukebox.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
So whatever, I used to be scared. What's going to be in the top 20 this week? Because you can bet if it stuck around long enough, we'd have to learn it, and we'd have to learn it sounding like people were used to the song sounding.
Sure.
So, you know, some of it I loved, and some of it you just do what you love, and then you have to do what you don't like, but you try to make it your own.
Sure.
Kind of thing, you know.
Well, I know what it's like to be in a band with 3-4 guys. I can't imagine trying to schedule a practice all the time for 10 people and learn these new songs. Where did you do that?
At the Calabrese Club.
Oh, so you stayed right there.
And,
okay.
We were there, and it was very convenient because the guys, as you probably can appreciate, were set up.
Right.
And the sound was set up, and nothing had to go anywhere. So
Ruby Port didn't play many other places than the Calabrese?
We went out of town a couple times. We went to Boston, Ohio, a few other places, mainly one night stands. We did some outdoor gigs that I can remember for Erie Days or whatever it was called back then. Okay. But mainly we were a club band. We were their band. So
and you mentioned Jeannie. Why don't you tell the listeners a little bit about Jeannie?
I got to know her quite well, and she was a sweetheart, and she had a lovely controlled alto voice where I think I don't know what I am. I don't know if I'm soprano mezzo or what, but we kind of complemented each other very well.
Yeah.
As a person, she was a girl from Erie, just like me. And
Vincent girl from Vincent too? Yeah.
No, she went to a Catholic high school, I think. St. Ben's
Villa,
probably,
St. Ben's,
Villa
yeah.
or Ben's
Gotcha.
or somewhere.
Right.
And she was the Polish girl and I was the Italian girl. And when you're in Erie and then you add the German and the Irish to that, you've got Erie, right?
Right.
So we became quite close. She wore the outfits a lot better than I did because she was taller. And
Okay.
they were happy because she would wear the go-go boots that I refused to wear. So there was that.
But
she was lovely. And we were very sad when she became, it seemed quite sudden that she became very, very ill.
Right.
And that was a sad time for all of us. And we never replaced her.
Okay, that's what I was going to ask. Okay, all right. Because that was early on. I mean, she was very young. And,
yes, she was. And we were about 20 years old, maybe.
Okay. And then, so you don't replace her. So you continue to be the primary singer in the band, or
pretty much, yeah. Okay. And then I forget what happened, but eventually, again, it kind of wore out its welcome, as all good things do. And then the age of disco came in, and it was more of they didn't really have a whole lot of live bands then.
Okay.
In the club. So I started doing other things. Oh, there was another configuration of Ruby Port called Poe. I remember being in Poe with Mike Goodwin, again, excellent player.
How did you spell it? P-O?
P-O-E, like
P-O-E.
Edgar Allan.
Okay, yeah. All right.
Don't ask me why. I have no idea why.
What does Ruby was in that band. What does Ruby Port mean?
Another cute story. We're sitting there during one of those rehearsals at the Cali Club in the early days, and we're sitting at the bar, staring out at all the pretty bottles of liquors, and we were trying to think of a name for the band. Now, Peter Natale will tell you that it was his idea, but I am going on record that it was my idea.
All right.
We looked at all the different bottles, and I said, look, I didn't know anything about booze at all. And I said, look, there's something called Ruby Port. What about the Ruby Port band? And everybody said, that's kind of cool. And I said, yeah, what about that? That's how it happened. Huh. And everybody said, are you Ruby? And I said, no, it's just the name of the band. Now, Peter will take credit for it, and I will go to my grave saying it was my idea.
I'll have Peter on the podcast for sure, and I'll get his side of the story.
As long as he knows. So there was that. That was part of it too.
Okay, so you got Ruby Port, you got Poe. Poe lasts a short period of time, I take it.
Yeah. I can't remember how long that lasted.
Because we're into the 70s. We're in the mid 70s now, right?
Then. Yes. Okay. Here's what happens. Angelo goes off to join a band called Ma Brown in Cleveland, Ohio, and because he was so good. And Bob Tome, I don't know if you know Bob.
I know of him. I know the name, right?
Well, he's a good friend of mine, and he was already in this band in Cleveland called Ma Brown, and they were headed for the big time. They had a real manager and a real agent, and I started going out with Bob. Was that before? I can't remember. Oh, Angelo comes home. This is it. He comes home from Ma Brown, from Cleveland, and he comes into the Cali Club because we're still playing there. And he says, he has a big cross hanging off his neck. And I said, what's going on with you? And he said, I've had an experience with the Lord and all these things happening. And I looked at him and said, because, I always went to church, and he used to make fun of me going to church. He used to send me cards at Easter, like glittery cards with pictures of Jesus on them, the baby Jesus, that would say, have a holy, Christmas, or have a holy Easter. And he would mock me.
Yeah.
And I said, okay, Angelo, this has gone a step too far. You coming in here with this cross on, but it was real. He really had a genuine, he called it a conversion experience. Bob, same thing. Before you know it, we've got Angelo, Bob, Mike Watson, who's a phenomenal bass player who became a pastor.
Okay.
Who's retired now in Erie.
So he replaced Bob Seaman.
Not in that band. No, this was a whole different band.
Oh, that's right. Whole different band. Okay.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
We sorry, I'm not being clear enough.
No,
It's all
no, that's
kind of
fine.
muddled in my head. It's
Yeah.
one big band, you know.
As a bass player, I try to keep track of those guys. I know who Bob Seaman is for sure. So, okay, good.
You
Yeah.
know who Bob is. We had Mike Watson, phenomenal, really good.
Yeah.
We had Angelo. It was his band, started it. We had Scott. I think Bob Tome stayed in Cleveland, I believe. And we had Tom Stone, who doesn't live in Erie anymore, but was a phenomenal drummer.
Okay.
I mean, he was a carpenter by trade. So when he set up his drums, he had the whole thing hanging off a rack and a gong and
Oh,
you
yeah.
know, big Chinese gong, all this stuff. And we called ourselves Clockwise.
Right. Yeah.
Because and that was all original material.
Yeah. And you would call that Christian rock, right?
Yes, it was.
Yeah.
And Christian rock as a genre was just starting out with Larry Norman. I don't know if you're familiar with Larry Norman.
Yeah.
And, you know, guys like Randy Stonehill, it was a burgeoning, well, it turned out to be, you know, it's a business too,
Right.
you know.
Right.
But that was where we were at. And everybody was pretty sold out for the band. I was still going to school. But we kept playing.
Okay, so you were playing out in Clockwise around town.
We were
Now,
touring.
You're out of the, right.
Not around town so
No?
much, Chip. No, we were mostly Ohio, New York State, Kentucky, Pennsylvania, you know, in that area. We were always out and about.
What kind of venues?
Some churches, a lot of churches were getting very cool by then, you know, and getting youth oriented. So they would have clubs of their own. Like there was a club in Fort Wayne called Adam's Apple. And that was a whole, unbeknownst to a lot of secular musicians, that was a whole sort of a circuit that was national.
Right.
So I found out later on that my husband, who was in a Christian band from England, had already done a lot of the same gigs that we had done. Memphis, a lot of places. Yeah, so that was a definite circuit.
And so Clockwise, you guys record an album. One or how many?
We did one, and it was in Cleveland, and it was produced by Al Perkins. The album was still around today. I think somewhere you can get it.
Oh, yeah.
And by that time, I think Bob Tome did some work on it. And then Scott did some work on it. And we had another fellow, Dave Kostick, who's long gone from Erie. So, you know, there was that. We were doing that, and we were traveling a lot.
And so
a whole
lot. How many people are in Clockwise? 5?
We had, for a while, we had Gail Campbell, who's no longer Gail Campbell, but Gail, and me, Angelo, Mike Watson, Tom Stone, and either 1 or 2 guitar players, depending on the time.
So like 7 people. Again, a bigger band. You know, you're not a power trio. Yeah.
No. So
and so you mentioned Gail. So I know that you were in Jonah too.
Yeah, Jonah was just like the first. She was in I think we called it Clockwise by the time she was in it. She joined when Scott did, because at the time they were a couple.
So gotcha. So that's before Jonah, or no?
That's after Jonah.
Okay.
Jonah was basically just, I think, Tom Stone and Mike Watson doing a trio thing for a while, and then they grew, and Angela said, "Hey, Paula, you want to be a Jonah-ette?" And I said, "Yeah, sure," because I knew him so well. We'd been doing duo things to Angelo and myself around town, just little things. And we knew each other, like you probably do this in your duo. You know that other person's performance and their instincts so well. You get to know where they're going next, either with vocals or with playing, fills, whatever. You know where they're going next with before they do. And you know,
it's a good feeling.
Yeah.
Well, back then, so we're out of the Calabrese Club. You know, you're traveling around with Clockwise, and you're doing maybe this duo stuff once in a while. Where are you doing? Where in Erie are they having duos in the mid 70s?
Still mainly churches and stuff.
Okay. Okay,
churches.
Gotcha. All right.
So, although we did a gig at Mercyhurst College in June of 1978.
This is the famous gig that I've heard about, right?
Have you heard about this?
Should we bring Phil in for this conversation?
He's at work.
Oh,
He's at work. But I'm sure
is
he'd
this
be happy to talk to you another time about, how what a magical night it was.
That's right. No, am I thinking the same thing? Right. So Scott said, make sure you ask her about, and how do I say his band's name? Alwyn Wall?
Alwyn Wall. He
Alwyn
was
Wall,
the
right.
leader of the band.
Right.
And so they
right.
just named the band after him. Now they had much greater, they had recorded where the Beatles recorded at Abbey Road.
Right.
They had a string section that had played on some Beatles albums. They had the same symphony orchestra members from London playing. They toured with Larry Norman. They'd been around Europe twice.
Okay.
And they were coming to America. And they thought they were coming to be treated the way they were treated in Europe and in the UK.
Sure.
And ABC Records kind of, kind of humbled them a little bit.
Right.
So they were doing little gigs here and there. They were
Mercyhurst College Mercyhurst College is not the giant arena that they were expecting.
No,
right?
It was actually in a 300-seater theater. And I remember hearing them warming up. I didn't want to be there. I had a boyfriend. I wanted to go out for dinner on a Saturday night like a normal girl and not do a gig, right?
Right.
And Angelo called me and he said, oh, the Christian Beatles are coming to town. And there's another band that was supposed to open for them at Mercyhurst and they can't come. This is at like 5:00 that day.
Sure. Yeah.
And I said, I'm not doing it. I want to go out. I'm going out. And he said, oh, come on. He guilted me into it. So I went, and I was not in a very nice mood, and it was raining and it was hot, and Erie gets steamy.
Sure. And you're supposed to open, you're going to be the opening band?
We're opening for these guys. Yeah.
Right.
And it was only their second gig since they got
to the States.
They had just broken in a new guitar player, a new bass player, and a new drummer.
Okay.
They had just broken them in. They found them in Florida. 3 guys came over from England. And the other 2 stayed back, and they needed to replace them once they got here. They were based in Nashville. That's where they were living. So I wasn't in a good mood. I'm singing, and out of the corner of my eye to the right, I see some guy with big, huge gag sunglasses and red suspenders. They call them braces.
Okay.
And he's leaping up and down and waving at me. And I thought, who is that idiot? Then they went up and played, and he played keyboards, and they were so good that,
he still had the braces and glasses on during the gig?
No, he took
the
glasses off.
He was just trying to get your attention and mess you up.
Yeah, I think so. And he came up to me after the whole concert was over, and I was in a very bad mood because my night was ruined,
Right.
And he said, how old are you? I said, I'm 25. And he goes, oh, you're old enough for me. Well, he's 2 years younger than I am. And then he said, which one of the lads in the band are you married to? And I said, none of them. Why? And, so it wasn't like the best start. And we all wound up, after a gig, you go out and you go somewhere cheap, a diner. So we went to Dudley's
Dominic's.
Ice Cream Parlor.
Oh,
Dominic's was the best. We took these guys to a safe place. It was an ice cream place.
Yep.
And we were sitting there talking, and he said, we're doing another album, and we'd love you to sing on it. And so I fell for it, and I gave him my name and my number. The guys in my band were sitting there looking at me like, Paula, behave, because they were like my big brothers. They were always looking out for me, especially when I didn't want them to look out for me. Nobody paid for my meal. My husband-to-be turned to me and said, I'd pay for you, but I need to pay for the lads in the band. And I said, this is not a date. This is not a date. There's like 10 people sitting around.
Right.
And it's not a date. So on my way to the car, his band had already gotten into their van. And I'm saying goodbye. And I'm going to give him the side hug that you give in church, And he grabs me, bends me backward, and plants one right on my mouth.
Wow.
And his band starts like pounding on the side of the van and, yelling stuff. And my guys are inside looking at me like, she's doing it again. She's the fallen woman. She's doing it again. So long story short, I did go to Nashville. There was no second album. He tricked me, and now we're married.
Oh, and that's how it works. Yeah.
Pretty much.
So the band is over at that point, I imagine. Like, how much longer did Clockwise last after that?
They carried on without me.
They carried on without you.
Yeah, as long as they could. I can't remember how long for. I'd have to ask Ange. But then we had, I forget who, I think they didn't get another singer, I don't think. But they kept going for a while.
So at this
And
point,
meanwhile, I'm getting married. So
where
that
at?
was not in my plan.
Did you go to Nashville to live down there then? Is that where he was?
No, by then Phil's band was going back to England. So his band went back to England. We went to England too. Got married, and 2 weeks later, crossed the ocean. Yeah.
Wow.
That was tough.
That
was tough on my parents because I'm the only child.
Okay.
So
yeah.
And my dad was in the war. He was in England during World War II, and he would say things like, England, warm beer, rain, nowhere to sleep. And I said, Dad, that was during the war.
Yeah.
So
while you're over there, do you still sing and play, or?
Well, yes, not immediately. My husband became quite ill with non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. We were probably married about 2 years or so, and I was expecting. And toward the end of my pregnancy, he got real sick, and we didn't know what was wrong. And it took probably till our son was about 18 months old before he was diagnosed with cancer, my husband.
Right.
And so that was a chunk, like 5 years, the first 5 years or so of our marriage was spent getting him well again, which we did. But it was a long haul at the time.
Sure.
And while we were sort of on the end of all that, somebody asked us to play. So the two of us had already been, you mess around at home with the piano and everything. And we did a couple gigs. And before you know it, we're doing more and more. And we asked another couple who played guitar and bass and sang to join us.
Okay.
And then we only used a drum machine. We called the drum machine Dave. This was the 80s. So
I was going to say, very 80s. Yeah, right.
Yes, very 80s.
Yeah.
But we played in pubs. We played in clubs. It was, a great time. And
what type of stuff?
Oh, wow. Again, mostly covers. We'd
mostly
written
covers.
a few ourselves, which I listen to them now and I think, those are still darn good tunes. They're,
sure.
A good tune is a good tune, right?
Right.
But we didn't do any sacred music, even though we all went to the same church. We did things like Miracle of Love by the Eurythmics. We did a lot of soul music because, funnily enough, maybe not so funny, English people love R&B and they love soul. And they love old soul, like the Delphonics and Aretha. And so we did a lot of that. We did a lot of Shaka Khan.
Wow.
And, Stevie Wonder, things like that. It was a cool time because we were able to actually give back to the hospital unit that had treated my husband. We did some benefit stuff. And,
nice.
It turned out to be a lot bigger than I thought it was going to be. And that was really neat. So we just kept playing and never really stopped having a band until we came back to the States.
And when was that? When did you come back?
1991.
All right. And why did you come back?
We came back because my husband's real business, he always jokes and says, if we had just done music, we wouldn't be in our house now. We came back because he had realized that there was a little product that was not the main product of his business in England. And he was convinced he could take that product. It was an ink pump and turn it into a business on its own.
Okay.
And because he's an engineer too, which I didn't know when I said I'd marry him. I thought we were going to just have a caravan and have kids and traipse around the country and do music.
The hippie lifestyle, right?
Yeah, exactly. And he said, oh, I think I'd better tell you about the company. And I said,
you married a nerd. You didn't even know it.
My father had always said when I was at Gannon, he'd say, why do you date all these misunderstood poets and these musicians? Why don't you date somebody from the engineering department? And I'd say,
perfect.
Because they're boring. They're boring. But, I eat my words many times over now. And he always teases me about how if it wasn't for that, we would probably be on the street.
So did you go right to Florida where you are now?
No, we were in Erie from
Oh,
91 till about 10 years ago. Long story short,
yeah.
I wasn't there that long before I started singing in bands again because all my old buddies that
Yeah.
I'd grown up with were still in town. Most of them were still in town.
Well, I know there was
So
a bit of a revival of Ruby Port within
I
the
was
past
part of that
decade.
briefly,
Okay.
briefly. But before that, I was doing things with Dick Buckle,
Sure.
with Joe Celerino on drums.
Okay.
Sometimes we would get some really good horn players. It was called Crosstown Rhythm and Blues, which
Oh,
was a revamp
sure.
of their old
Right.
band. Yeah. And I sang
Absolutely.
with Roy Hollis Jr. And that
Roy,
was a lot of fun.
well, Roy lives down the street from me, and I plan to have him on the
Give him
podcast
my
soon. So
love.
I
Give
will.
him my
Yeah.
love. 'Cause,
He's in a
we had a
fantastic
gap.
band now.
Yeah, I know. I know.
Yeah, the
I was
Groove.
well, I was in that. I was going to be in that band as one
The
of the
Groove.
singers
Gotcha.
briefly, and then we were moving to Florida, so that didn't happen, but it almost
Gotcha.
happened. Before that, I was with Marty O'Connor.
Oh,
You know
yeah.
Marty O'Connor,
Sure. Yeah.
Dave
Another guy.
Blades,
Dave Blade's one of my
um,
favorite bass players and people in the world. Yeah.
Dave
Yeah.
Blades, and such a sweetheart.
Yep.
Marty, Dave, Timmy, and Phil
And Phil.
Popotnik.
Right. Right.
So
Yep.
we did that. We were at the Bel Air. We played lots of weddings.
Was that just
Um,
Marty O'Connor and Friends? Is that what it
Yeah,
was calling
that
it?
was
Okay.
us.
Sure.
Yeah,
Yeah. 'Cause I
yeah.
mean, I
And
remember
it was
going
good.
there. Yeah. Seeing him and Phil and Dave as a trio,
Yeah.
years and years in the 80s,
Yes, yes.
and
We would go out and see them, and I would sit in because Phil knew me. Marty
sure.
didn't. So I would go up and do like one or two songs with them, but more jazz songs like "God Bless the Child," and
Right.
because by then, I don't know what happens to us, a lot of us musicians. Once we hit a certain age, we gravitate to jazz.
Mm,
Maybe that's not always true,
right.
but
Right.
that's what happened to me.
Okay.
Songs that my dad sang, and he'd say, this song is a good song. This God Bless the Child song, and Love is a Many Splendid Thing. Those are good songs. You should sing them. And I'd say, I'm never singing that stuff. And there I was.
It all
Um,
comes around.
Yeah. And Marty said, you're really good. And Phil said, we should have her in the band. And Marty said, she's too good. She needs her own band. And I said, I'll sing with you guys. You're good. You're really
Yeah.
good. So,
Right.
so we did that a lot. We played a lot of gigs when I
Yeah.
think about it. And, the one thing, Chip, that I wanted to emphasize is in those days, like I said, there weren't many girls to go around singing
Right.
like there are now. I'm not quite sure why that is. I think it was just something that needed to evolve.
Hmm.
But all the guys, I can honestly say, every single person I was ever in a band with treated me with respect.
That's great.
I mean, I
Yeah.
got a lot of teasing. I'm not going to say I didn't,
Sure.
but just so respectful, like very brotherly, sometimes too much brotherly,
Right.
but
Right.
really, really looked out for me. And I've always had a great love and respect for the people I've worked with. I can't think of anybody that I would say, ugh, didn't
Sure.
like him.
Right.
They were all so good to me.
Yeah. And those are all veteran Erie musicians that have had,
Mhm.
tons of success and experience.
Yes,
And,
yes.
you know,
Sometimes I played with what I called back then. Now I'm one of the old guys.
yeah.
Back then, Stanley Bialomzi, I don't know if you know Stanley.
No.
Howard Hammy played keyboards. All these, they're like our grandparents. They could be grandparents now of us, or
Gotcha.
our parents, not grandparents, our parents, that age. And, they're becoming a dying breed now.
Sure. Right.
But
Right.
playing with them, I learned a lot too.
I
Because
bet.
I was playing with big bands. I did a couple things with big bands. Jeff Gibbons, people like that.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. Jeff's still
And
playing around town.
yeah, oh, he will, because he's
Yeah.
a youngster, really. But these other guys were a lot older. And I just remember being scared out of my boots when I first did a gig with a big band, like my dad. And then I thought, have fun with it. You can
Yeah.
do this.
Well, I mean, you
And
played in a band with 10 people at the beginning. I mean, that's a big
yeah,
band,
it was a little bit different with rock and roll, though, Chip. With the jazz, they have like their sheet music spread out like this wide.
Gotcha.
And I had a music stand, but I don't read. So I just had lyrics in front of me, and that was it.
Right.
And I was thinking, okay, where are they going with that solo? especially when I was with Marty and Phil and Dave, they would deconstruct a tune
Sure.
and do it so brilliantly. And
Right.
I'd be thinking, come in on the bridge. You know you're going to land on your feet. You know you're going to land on your feet. And somehow it all came together. But I remember just being a little bit frightened the first time I worked with a really big band with horns. It was a kick. It was a
Sure.
little kick to do it.
I
You
bet.
know, thinking, that big sound behind me. I love it. You know,
So
so I
did
did
you-
that for a while.
Did you continue playing once you got to Florida? I mean, did you go from Erie to Florida?
Yes.
Okay.
And
then,
the answer is basically no.
okay.
Couple of reasons for that. Didn't know anybody. St. Augustine is more, you guys as a duo would do great.
Yeah.
If you do, especially more folky stuff,
Mhm.
in St. Augustine, you're getting more grassroots type stuff,
Yep. Right.
generally speaking. And there's really no venues that I can think of around here where you would have a rock and roll band.
Gotcha.
I can't
Yeah.
think of one. Whereas in Jacksonville, you get some fantastic bands. Phil and I have put down some music. I don't know if I sent you anything or not. It's on SoundCloud. It's just
Right,
stuff we recorded. And that's pretty much about all I've been doing. I mean, I would love to have a band again, just for one night,
Right.
mine, you know, just to get back that feeling of the drum behind you, that bass is going.
Sure.
You got somebody playing like Scott over here and a sax solo over there. I just really miss it.
I figure that's probably a good place for us to stop.
Yes, it is. And I'm
so-
sorry. I want to apologize if I butted in too much. and
No,
if I
no,
talked
no.
too much. Feel
Nope.
free to edit, cut it down, whatever you want to do, because I
Nope.
know what I'm like.
I think everybody's going to want to hear this. You know, a lot of folks that listen to this are going to remember you, and I appreciate you being on. And I was excited to get you,
appreciate
to be
it.
honest with you. So
It
this was
an honor
great.
to be asked. I really appreciate it. It's great. Good fun.
Great. Hey, thanks for listening to this episode of the Erie Music History Podcast. I want to say thanks to the JPT Foundation. They have been a financial supporter of the podcast since the beginning, and they also will give us a free space to have our monthly music night on the first Tuesday of the month. It always features our great house band, the Fabulous Leftovers, as well as a lot of other local bands and musicians. But it's a lot of fun. First Tuesday of the month, totally free. Any donations go to the Second Harvest Food Bank. It is BYOB. There's a great pizza shop next door, Pasalinquas. Check that out, the first Tuesday of the month. Also, make sure that you check out Jack Stevenson's Two-Man Happy Hour podcast. Basically tells you where people are playing today, where and when, and you can check that out at the number 2manhappyhour.com. All right, that's all I got for you. Thanks again for listening.